A panel of FDA advisors are meeting today to consider options for updating COVID vaccines for a fall booster campaign. They will vote on whether the shots should target Omicron or one of its subvariants. And according to Pfizer, the updated version of their vaccines that were adapted to the Omicron variant to deliver higher immune response against the strain. According to the FDA's framework, there was an agreement among the FDA that decisions on vaccine strain composition should be undertaken as a coordinated process led by the FDA and with consideration of any global recommendations that the WHO might provide. Also want to bring up on this is that a lot of people are really up in arms over the meeting today because they're also deciding on whether or not any sort of subsequent vaccines that are then updated and modified for various variants, whether or not they need FDA approval each time. So a lot of people are saying, oh my gosh, they're coming out with these, they're going to let vaccines out that don't have FDA approval. When I read up on it, it is more akin to what happens with the flu shot. The flu shot, I haven't done the research on this one. I just kind of looked at this briefly, but I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, the flu shot requires FDA approval each season when they update it for the strain. I think just the basic formula was approved, and then they update it for each flu strain that comes out. And that's what they want to do also with the COVID vaccine as well, without needing FDA approval.
My understanding with the flu is that there's two main strains, and they alternate which vaccine they offer each season, kind of guessing which one is going to be the more dominant strain.
Really?
That could be totally wrong. That's what
I believe
I was told.
But I thought they changed it.
You think they tweak it every time?
Well, based on the data that they have, yes, and maybe available previous strains, and they're kind of like, oh, this one's kind of similar to that one, so maybe I don't know, but maybe you're right. Maybe they just circled these two over and over.
I would certainly not.
Again.
I, more in a kind of right to try mindset, would not necessarily think or want the vaccine makers to have to get permission from the FDA every time they make some change, not wholly new science or anything like that, but just, making some change to the vaccine to deal with the new variant. Because we want, for people who are, again, it should absolutely be your choice in my mind, whether you get the vaccine. But for people who are choosing to get the vaccine, we do want it to be effective against, what is out there, or else then whatever. If you think there are medical downsides to taking the vaccine, if you've looked at the data and you're concerned about the downsides, well, then at least you should want the upsides to be there, right? That they're actually confronting the variants that are available. So I would not. Yeah, I would not lean toward wanting excessive FDA meddling. Again, totally voluntary to my mind whether you take it. But
to that point, there's different kinds of testing. There's testing for efficacy. There's testing for, whether it's dangerous.
Safety.
There's testing to see if it actually addresses the new kinds of variants. And so it would be difficult for me to imagine that they don't have to test efficacy with new variants if they're prescribing it to be taken to address new waves of COVID, even if they might not necessarily have to go through all of the whole hoops that were first had to be jumped through to prove that other components of the vaccine weren't harmful. So it might be that kind of situation where they can skip if there's no new additions to the vaccine beyond the tweaks to the the part that targets the virus to target the new strain of the virus, then there might be a decision made to fast track the process on that basis. But it's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, I think that sounds reasonable to me. If you're just tweaking the actual code that targets whatever the virus is and you're not changing the formula and everything else basically stays the same, then I would imagine you wouldn't need to jump through those hoops every single time. However, I think that there's a solid argument to be made that maybe they should be considering updating the actual vaccines themselves, first generation, anything. Like how many of us are still using Internet Explorer or Netscape or something? First generation anything is not the best. And usually it's the subsequent, things that come out that end up being better. And so maybe they should be looking at this. But another aspect of this that's really interesting is, why did it take so long to update these vaccines? We're still using the same vaccine from the original strain. And the whole point of mRNA, the whole selling point was, when we get the code and we get it sequenced, we can actually whip out a vaccine within 24 to 48 hours. Where did that idea go? Why is it taking so long now to get in the fall we're going to get an Omicron shot when Omicron's going to, everybody will have had it by then. It's been, gone through the population.
Yeah, I don't know. It could still be regulatory holdups, even if the approval process is easier, right? There's a lot of crossing of T's and dotting of I's that has to occur. Maybe they don't think enough people are gonna take advantage of new vaccines. Maybe we're a little saturated in the vaccine rhetoric and what was expected of them. The difference between the early claims or idea that it was going to very much massively stop you from you're going to be really even immune to getting sick at all, which didn't pan out. I still think we absolutely want to be, because we're hoping that the disease continues to mutate in a less lethal direction, which has been its trajectory, and so fingers crossed that continues. And I think my understanding is there are evolutionary reasons why that would likely be true, but this was a once-in-a-century disaster that we don't want to repeat like a second time this century. We should absolutely be doing whatever the necessary research is to be prepared. It would be great if we were not as debilitated, if this were to happen again, even with a somewhat different disease. It's completely debilitating society as we wait for 2 years for vaccination. We got to fast-track this process so that people who want to take advantage of vaccines can. So that's what I would say. It does seem like the ball's being dropped a little bit here. So
yeah, it's interesting. And now we're seeing parts of the world like Taiwan, for example, that's been isolated. They hadn't had the virus this entire time during the pandemic, and now they just got it. And their wave is larger than any wave we saw here in the United States on a per capita basis. And they're also seeing a lot of deaths in Taiwan as well. And so it's, the world is just getting this. And there should be definitely, we know who the most vulnerable people are when they catch this. We do still need to be focusing on treatments, if that's in the form of a vaccine, if that's in the form of pills or whatever that might be. We need to be definitely focusing on that to help keep people safe when they catch this virus, those most vulnerable. But, another thing about this that's interesting is just there's many other vaccines that have been coming out on the market that, again, like I mentioned, second generation stuff is often better, third generation even better than that. They're not being let into the United States. We only still have very few options for Americans versus other countries that have many, many, many options. And that, I think, is another point of discussion, is that, we've got to rein in on big pharma and their greed. But
Kim, isn't that an FDA failure too? That's got to be
a mix.
A mix, but that's got to be substantially an FDA failure that we don't have other things approved here, because the FDA drags its feet sometimes for decades on approving, just in general, treatments, products, et cetera, that are widely available elsewhere, even in Europe, in very close peer countries to ours. I think I brought it up 1,000 times on the show just because it's such a good example. There's sunblocks that are perfectly legal everywhere in Europe that the FDA has been waiting decades to approve, and so many other things like that.
It's pay to play, and so you've got to pay in order to get approved.
The conversation about who is responsible, there are apparently 344 COVID-19 vaccine candidates. Of those, 31 vaccine products are already in large-scale use after being approved by the WHO. Now, America respects drugs that have been approved by the WHO, by the World Health Organization. So it would seem to be that the reason that we don't have at least access to those 31 vaccines isn't about the FDA in this instance, but about pharmaceutical lobbying. We all know what big roles they have played in that.
Are you saying that if something is automatically approved by the WHO,
it doesn't require FDA approval, according to this article I'm reading in the New England Journal of Medicine?
Well, I
don't know if that's true.
I think it means the United States will accept, you can come into the country if you've received the Sinovax, from China, for example, but it doesn't. But we don't offer it here. I mean, they certainly could fast track. I do think, though, that big pharma has a lot to do with the lobbying in order to keep their competitors out. I mean, that these guys have billions and billions of dollars on the line, so they don't want to give that up. I mean, it took forever for Novavax even to get looked at by the FDA, and it was being distributed all around the world. And then and it's an American vaccine, and we finally now are just barely getting it, but too little too late. Most people now are not interested. They've already had COVID, and they're kind of like, whatever.
We'll be continuing to follow this, and we will be having more Rising for you right after this.